back this up just a sec because I don't think we quite got there. We were talking about the Emancipation Proclamation, which was originally issued in September of 1862, and then the permanent or the real Emancipation Proclamation is published or issued on January 1st, 1863. Lincoln does not control the South. He does not control the rebellious states. So when he says the slaves who reside in the states that are currently in rebellion are free, he's really not doing anything. On paper, they are, according to the Emancipation Proclamation, but in reality, they're not, because he doesn't control southern states. What it does is it gives hope to people who previously had no hope. He gives hope to 4.5 million enslaved persons living in the South. So it does that, and then it does something that perhaps is more tangible. It ensures that England and France will not come to the aid of the South anymore. They are totally against slavery. And because Lincoln has done this, they will no longer assist the South in any way other than buy their cotton. Here's Lincoln. This picture was probably, I don't know. This might be the White House, might be his bedroom at the White House, or it could be his bedroom at what is called Lincoln's Cottage, which is a pretty good likelihood. It's a place that he and his family lived during the summer because it was cooler. So from May to October 1st, he would be found at Lincoln's Cottage, which was actually the old soldiers' home. It was a rehabilitation hospital for soldiers who were wounded, injured in battle. Anyway, that's another story. All right, so here's my big question. During a war, what happens to property that is captured by the winning side? Who does it belong to? The winning side. That's exactly right. So, what did Southern slave owners consider slaves to be? In fact, what did the U.S. government consider slaves to be? According to the Dred Scott decision, it's property. So when the Union Army comes through the South and they win a battle, what about the slaves? They're property, right? So who are they the property of now? The Union Army. And what does the Union Army do with them? Frees them. Sets them free. So, the Dred Scott decision. I told you the Dred Scott decision was an awful, awful decision. But, as awful as it was, it actually turned out to be good because it gives the Emancipation Proclamation teeth. Lincoln doesn't control, but as the army comes through, they're able to liberate slaves. And so I think that's just a pretty cool connection between Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and the Dred Scott decision. Anyway, you may not think so, but I think it's a pretty cool connection, and I'll ask you to write about that connection at some point in time. So the Battle of Antietam gives Lincoln the opportunity to issue this proclamation, and that was the political importance of that battle. The Battle of Gettysburg, which is the other battle that we'll talk about that takes place outside of Georgia, has significance because it becomes the turning point of the Civil War. And you'll hear people argue that no, it wasn't the turning point. I think it is. It's a 3-day battle from July 1st to July 3rd, 1863. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, just over the West Virginia line. The Union Army is under the command of General George Meade. He has just been put into that position. He's got about 90,000 men. The Confederate Army, the Army of Northern Virginia, of course, is under the command of Robert E. Lee. He's got about 75,000 men. So somewhere between 160 and 170,000 men find themselves on the field of battle in Gettysburg. It is the largest battle of the American Civil War. It's the bloodiest battle of the American Civil War. And it's the largest battle ever fought in North America. And it does change the tide of the American Civil War. Union suffers a little over 23,000 casualties. That's dead, wounded, missing. And the Confederacy, about 28,000, a little over 28,000. And you can see the numbers down at the bottom, 23,049 for the United States, 3,155 dead, 14,529 wounded, and 5,365 missing. Confederacy, 28,063, about 3,900 are dead, almost 19,000 are injured, and about 5,425 go missing. The United States Army can stand to lose that many people. The Confederate Army cannot. Robert E. Lee cannot afford to lose a third of his army, and that's what he loses. More than a third of his army. It was, in a word, awful. And we'll watch some videos today that kind of give you more detail as to what happened. Hopefully spark some interest on your part. There's a couple of books up here about Gettysburg, a lot of pictures. So feel free to use those if you want to. Yes.
There was this camp I went to in Gettysburg when I was like 5,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like at a college. It was on one of the battlefields.
Gettysburg College, or yeah.
And it was like this house that was supposedly haunted with like dead soldiers. And
Yeah, it's the most haunted battlefield in America, with good reason. All right, so this is just some places of note. There's a list of it. If you read anything about Gettysburg, if you watch any kind of documentary, or even there's a great movie out that's really long called Gettysburg, of course. But you're going to read about the Devil's Den, which was actually known as the Devil's Den before Gettysburg. It was a rock-strewn area outside of Gettysburg. People would go there to picnic and to watch the sunset. It's just like a park, and all these big boulders around that people would, people like to climb on rocks. The Copse, you're going to hear about that. That's a group of trees. The angle, there's a rock wall, and there's an angle in that wall where it changes direction. The Wheatfield, Little Round Top, Culp's Hill, Seminary Ridge, the Peach Orchard, and the Valley of Death. Sounds kind of ominous, doesn't it? Yea, though I walk through the Valley of Death. Not too many people walked through the Valley of Death at Gettysburg. A lot of people died in the Valley of Death. A lot of people died in the Peach Orchard and all the other places too. So here are maps of all 3 days. Day 1 is July 1st, and there is not supposed to be a battle at Gettysburg. It is not supposed to happen. It is an accident. A.P. Hill, Richard Ewell are just kind of sniffing around. Harrisburg, you look at a big map, and I'll show you one in a minute. Harrisburg sits up here, right on top of the screen. It is the capital of Pennsylvania. Lee's plan is to come up, not even bother with Gettysburg, take Harrisburg, come down through Pennsylvania to Philadelphia, take Philadelphia, and then approach Washington, D.C. from the north. That's Lee's plan. If you, that got big for some reason. If you talk to somebody who really doesn't know what they're talking about, they might tell you that Gettysburg was fought over shoes, because of shoes. That there was a huge shoe factory in Gettysburg, and the Confederacy needed shoes, so they invaded Pennsylvania to take home shoes. There's only two things wrong with that. In 1863, the Confederate soldier is pretty well outfitted. He doesn't need shoes. And B, there's not a shoe factory in Gettysburg. So that's something somebody made up for whatever reason. So A.P. Hill and Richard Ewell are just kind of sniffing around, and they actually bump into General John Reynolds, General Abner Doubleday, and John Howard, just on accident. Well, of course, they're at war, so what do? They start shooting at one another. And on day one, the Confederate forces actually number, I want to say about 18,000, and the Union troops maybe 7,000 or 8,000, somewhere in that neighborhood. They are pushed, at the end of the day, they're pushed through Gettysburg. John Reynolds is killed. He's the highest officer on the field at the time. He's killed, and the Union Army kind of falls apart, comes through Gettysburg, and they settle on this area right here, which is known as Cemetery Hill and Cemetery Ridge. Day one belongs to the Confederacy. During the night, General George Meade and General Lee send as many troops as they can into the Gettysburg area. General Meade is pretty well entrenched here. This is the end of the day on July the 2nd, 1863. Dan Sickles, right here, is actually supposed to be here. But he knew better than George Meade, and he decided he was going to take his troops out into the peach orchard because he thought he could use his artillery better. He was wrong. It forces George Meade to bring more men in to fill the void. The Little Round Top and Round Top are right over here. They're just hills, but they're high ground. That's very important. Let me tell you the story of Dan Sickles. He was nuts. He was certifiably crazy. Fairly wealthy guy as the Civil War breaks out, and like a lot of people who were wealthy or influential, he chose to basically buy himself a commission. And so he's commissioned an officer in the U.S. Army. He rises to the rank of Brigadier General, I believe. But at Gettysburg, he has been told to fill the gap between Cemetery Ridge, which is right here, and the Round Tops, which are right down here. He decides he knows better. He goes out into the peach orchard and gets his butt handed to him, literally. He gets hit in the leg with a cannonball, shatters his femur. He's taken from the field, taken into the hospital, where his leg is amputated, and it's really a high amputation. He has a very short stump. As he's lying there, or before his leg is amputated, he tells the surgeon, "Do not throw away my leg. I want my leg." And so Dan Sickles kept his leg. You can actually go to Washington, D.C. and see Dan Sickles' leg. Well, you can see the bones anyway, because he donated it to the Museum of Health and Medicine in Washington, D.C., actually to the Smithsonian, and they put it in the Museum of Health and Medicine. So you can see what a cannonball will do to the human body. He recovers from that, fights throughout the rest of the Civil War, survives the Civil War. They actually have to tie him in his horse, tie him in his saddle, because otherwise he would fall over because he's only got one leg. And he carries that leg with him and really until he dies or until he donates it. After the war, he becomes a U.S. Senator for the state of New York. So he's living in Washington, D.C. His wife is a very beautiful woman, perhaps a little too beautiful, because she catches the eye of another senator. And they have a fling. They have an affair. Dan Sickles finds out. Remember, Dan Sickles is crazy. Dan Sickles takes his Navy Colt revolver, which is about that long and weighed about 700 pounds. It weighed about 12 pounds. And he shot, just met him on the street and killed him. Broad daylight in front of hundreds of witnesses. Dan Sickles kills the man who is having an affair with his wife. Well, he's arrested. He's put on trial. And he's found innocent. He is found innocent, or rather not guilty, by reason of temporary insanity. And he is the first person in the United States to use that as a defense and win. And so he goes back to being a U.S. Senator. Oh, yeah. And dies many years later. So Dan Sickles, a little bit nuts. Dan Sickles actually has or was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his actions that day, only because he had some influence and the U.S. won the day. All right, so day 3, and if you notice how Meade has deployed his troops, here was where Dan Sickles was supposed to be. Of course, on July 3rd, he's not there. But you'll notice it's kind of like a fish hook or a hook. Okay? And that's to George Meade's advantage. First of all, he's got the high ground. On either side, you have Confederate troops. They're down below him. Easier to defend. And it's also easier to communicate. It's easier for George Meade to communicate with his commanders. From here to here is only about 2.5 miles. So if Slocum needs to communicate with Sedgwick, it's 2.5-mile horse ride. That's pretty quick. Contrast that with Robert E. Lee. You see how spread out he is. It's 6 miles from this end of Lee's line to this. So if they have to communicate, it's much more difficult. And also, George Meade is able to move troops around pretty easy because it's such a short distance. They're more concentrated. Day 3 is really the turning point of the Civil War. George Pickett, George Pettigrew, divisions. They haven't been involved in the fighting on day 1 or day 2, so they're pretty fresh. About 12,000 Virginians are situated on Seminary Ridge. It's back over here. And their orders are to attack the center of the Union line. They've tried the flanks. They've tried the ends. Can't do it. So Lee decides to attack the middle. And that's never a good idea. And it wasn't on this day. It's a massacre. About 12,000 Virginians cross a mile of open ground while people are shooting cannonballs at them. And they hit that line. They actually break through the line, but are pushed back. 6,000 are killed or wounded in about an hour, roughly. Maybe not even that long, by the time they reach the stone wall. The stone wall that I referred to, or maybe I didn't, is about where that dark blue line depicting the Union Army is. All right. So, a little bigger map. Not going to beat a dead horse here, although I could if you wanted me to. Day one, John Reynolds is killed. Union Army retreats. They regroup on Cemetery Hill. And here's a couple of things. Here's the peach orchard. Remember, Dan Sickles comes out and fights in the peach orchard. The wheat field, Devil's Den, Little Round Top, Cemetery Ridge, Cemetery Hill, and then back over here you have Seminary Ridge and then Culp's Hill. Day two, most of the fighting is concentrated in the peach orchard, Devil's Den, and Little Round Top. And it is Confederacy's that close. Confederate Army is that close to breaking George Meade's army. And had they done it, the war would have been much different. They don't. And war changes from that point. Again, this is day three. You've got Pickett, Trimble, and Pettigrew, about 12,000 men. There's a stone wall right here, and tomorrow I'll show you a picture taken from behind that stone wall. You can actually see where Pickett's men started as they came across that field. And the copse, which is just a stand of trees. Again, the Confederate Army gets through that wall. They get over the wall. At least part of them do. But because Meade is easily able to send troops here and yonder, the line's reinforced and the Confederate Army is pushed back. All right. This is a picture taken by Timothy O'Sullivan. He actually worked for Matthew Brady, who's the most famous Civil War photographer. And you can see they've been laying there a while. They're all kind of bloated. This is my favorite gross picture from the Civil War. Hey, Damien, you might want to wake up and watch this. Don't let the hair get in your eyes. Okay. Let me see if I can blow this up for you. You want me to blow it up a little bit? Because people in the back really can't see it, can they? Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Here's his hand. He probably got hit on the left side of his body with a cannonball or a shell. There's an unexploded shell right here. Or he got his arm blown off, and then the feral pigs came and fed on his body, which may have happened. But again, he's been out there a while. Look at his face. It's swollen. His eyes are kind of bugging out of his head. That is nasty. Here is Lee's Gettysburg Campaign. He starts down in Virginia near Fredericksburg, and he sends his army up through the Shenandoah Valley into Pennsylvania. Here's Harrisburg. That's his original target. He has sent some men to Harrisburg, and they're just kind of hanging out, waiting for the rest of the army to get there. And then things break at Gettysburg, and everybody descends on Gettysburg. Of course, the Union Army is doing the same. The dotted line is cavalry. Jeb Stuart doesn't show up when he's supposed to show up, so that hurts the Confederate cause at Gettysburg. Things might have been different had he been on time, but he wasn't. Gettysburg in 4 minutes. Gary Adelman.
Drinking water before bed burns
46
pounds in 2 weeks. If you are struggling to lose weight and you're over 25, then you need to hear this. People are burning 2.5 pounds of fat each night as they sleep by
There we go.
In June of 1863, Confederate General Robert E. Lee took his Army of Northern Virginia into the North for the second time. The Union commander, George Gordon Meade, was in pursuit. They would ultimately bump into each other here at Gettysburg. Behind me is the town of Gettysburg, around which the Battle of Gettysburg will be fought. The Battle of Gettysburg started by accident. Literally, troops bumped into each other. General Lee heard that Meade was pursuing him, and Lee concentrated his army. The Union vanguard, and they're going to bang into each other north and west of town on the first. It's an intense fight. Until north of town, you're going to have the Union election. He gets the corps under a guy named Richard Ewell. In the end, you're going to have 30,000 Confederates outflanked and with 18,000 Union troops who retreat back through town to Cemetery Hill and to Culp's Hill, where we stand now. And for the next 24 hours, all that happens is that both sides bring the remainder of their troops here until the Yankees have maybe 90,000 troops and the Southerners have maybe 70,000 troops. And the Yankees form in the shape of a fishhook. And we are right here on this fishhook at the end of Culp's Hill here. The Union line will continue along Cemetery Hill behind me, Seminary Ridge, and eventually end over on Little Round Top. The Southerners line up around that line, basically formed on the most distant tree line you can see way off in the distance, okay? If General Lee needs to go from one side of his army to the other, it's 6 miles. Meade only has to go 2.5. Meade is also on the defensive. Meade has more men on a more compact line, and Lee is more strung out, and Meade finally has a home field advantage. On the second day of the battle, Robert E. Lee decided to take 20,000 troops under James Longstreet and attack the Union left, and take maybe 5,000 to 10,000 and attack Culp's Hill. But the attack on the Union left flank took place first. The Southerners are going to have to get over there without being seen opposite the Union lines. Ultimately, the Southern line will attack what's called an echelon, where a couple of brigades move in, and then a couple more, and ultimately, Longstreet's men will make fierce attacks. First, they'll fight at Devil's Den and Little Round Top, and then onto the wheat field. And then they actually have found a gap in the middle of the Union line, troops that had gone to reinforce some of the fighting in other areas. But the Confederates can't quite push through it, because wherever they show up, Union reinforcements from inside Meade's strong fishhook position arrive and push the Southerners back. Ultimately, the bloodiest fighting at Gettysburg, the second day on the south end, will come to a close. And while Longstreet is attacking the Union left flank, the Confederates are beginning a huge artillery bombardment on the Union right flank, here on Culp's Hill. That bombardment wouldn't do anything. The Confederate attack doesn't come for long, until long after, actually, the fighting on the Union left flank is mostly over. Ultimately, the Southerners will try to attack East Cemetery Hill. They capture part of East Cemetery Hill. They capture 9 cannons. This is the key Union position at East Cemetery Hill, and it's about to fall to the Confederates. But again, Union reinforcements push the Confederates back. The Confederates have a little bit more success here on Culp's Hill. Culp's Hill consists of 2 hills, an upper hill and a lower hill. This is night fighting, very odd in the Civil War. The Confederates easily capture the lower hill, but they're unable to capture the pinnacle of Culp's Hill. The next day, the fighting resumes, where the Confederates try to capture Upper Culp's Hill. The Yankees return with even more reinforcements, not only recapturing their old trenches in Lower Culp's Hill that they had lost, but maintaining their possession of Upper Culp's Hill. On the third day, having already tested the Union left flank and the Union right flank, the Confederates opted to attack the Union center. And this is what we now know as Pickett's charge. Pickett's charge is going to take place in the fields behind me, and on the afternoon of July 3rd, you're eventually going to have a great moan go up from the Union line. This is after a huge artillery bombardment. But the moan comes not from that, but rather from the beauty and pageantry of a great Confederate assault, 12,000 troops advancing across that field. You can see over my shoulder. The Yankees decimated their long-range artillery, and as they reached the road, Union reinforcements poured to the area. The Union flank bulged out, so the Confederates are going to get flanked, but nonetheless, they push on impetuously, gain some of the keys still along the area. The Yankees are able to, however, push them back. 6,000 of the 12,000 soldiers who made the attack were killed, wounded, or captured. We lost 23 battle flags in that attack, more than we've lost up to that point in the war combined. Robert E. Lee horribly failed in Pickett's charge, but the next day he still stayed here through the rain across the fields, faced George Gordon Meade, said, "Come on, Meade, attack me." Meade did not take the bait. That night, Robert E. Lee pulled back through the mountains. 9 days later, escaped back into Virginia. The Civil War goes on for almost 2 more years.
So kind of an overview of what happened on those 3 days. So a couple of other things. These are Georgia troops, notable Georgia troops that are at Gettysburg. John B. Gordon is Brigadier General, Gordon's brigade. We will hear a lot about John B. Gordon after the war. He becomes the governor of Georgia. He's a senator. He becomes the governor. While he's governor, he's also head of the Ku Klux Klan. So there is that. And then Dole's Brigade. Dole's Brigade is from, at least George Dole's is from Milledgeville. He dies at Cole Harbor after Gettysburg. He stood when he should have ducked, is basically what happened. His courage had been challenged, and he was actually a courageous man, and is shot and killed while leading his troops out front. If you know Milledgeville at all, you know that there's an area of town called Dole's Boulevard. It sits right back over there near the water treatment plant, if you know where that is. All right. Highest number of troops in the Army is the third highest Army, or the third highest number of troops in the Army of Northern Virginia from Georgia. As a result, the casualties are the third highest. And this is the memorial at Gettysburg to the Georgia soldiers. One of the cool things about Gettysburg is there are monuments everywhere. And the monuments tell the story. You can tell where troops from New York were, the 51st New York. You can tell where they were. You can tell where the 20th Maine was. You can see where James Longstreet led his troops into the Devil's Den, because every unit was invited to put something on the battlefield to commemorate what they did. So if you ever have the opportunity to go to Gettysburg, first of all, go. And secondly, spend some time there and just walk the battlefield. The United States Army still uses Gettysburg to teach their officers battlefield tactics and that kind of thing. So it's pretty cool. Again, 90,000 soldiers for the North. They lose about 23,000. Lee has about 75,000. He actually loses closer to 28,000 troops. Now, this is one of my favorite pictures, one of my favorite stories from Gettysburg. What do you see? People. Don't know who these people are, but I know who these people are. Okay. This is Mr. and Mrs. John Burns. They are old. I mean, they are really old, particularly for 1863. They're old. They're in their 70s. John is mid-70s, and when he hears the fighting on McPherson Ridge, north of Gettysburg, his response to it is, "No! By God, they will not do that." And so, being a veteran of the War of 1812, he digs out his uniform, and he digs out his flintlock musket. And a flintlock is old. It actually has a piece of flint attached to the hammer, and that's where the spark comes from to ignite the gunpowder. And he goes looking for a unit to join. Nobody will have him. Everybody turns him away. "Sir, you're too old. Please go back home." Until finally there's one brigade, or there's one unit that says, "Sure, we can use you." And they put him in a place where everybody's convinced there's not going to be any fighting. And of course, it's not much of a story if there's not fighting there, right? And so fighting does break out. He has exchanged his flintlock for a modern rifle, and has gotten cartridges in that rifle from a wounded soldier. And so he is fighting. He's fighting the Confederates. He's wounded 4 times. But he and the people that he are with are eventually overrun. The South, the Confederates, see this old man. After questioning him, they decide he's harmless. He's a civilian. He got caught in the fight. They dress his wounds, and they actually take him to his house. Pretty nice of them, wasn't it? Well, they just didn't know John Burns. This is John Burns. He's a crotchety-looking old man, isn't he? He's sitting in his rocking chair. He's been wounded. There are his crutches. There's his trusty flintlock. And Gary Adelman, who we just heard from, a friend of mine, introduced me to this picture. And he said, I looked at this picture at the National Archives. He actually was able to take the wet glass negative. And so he was able to really see what was in the picture. And as he looked, he kept noticing these black dots all over everything. And he couldn't figure out what they were. So he blew it up bigger and he discovered flies all over John Burns. As he counted 5, and he counted 9, and then he counted 17. So in this picture, there are 17 flies crawling all over John Burns. My question for you is why? A man wouldn't ordinarily let flies crawl all over him, would he? Okay, he has to be still for the picture, but he's not dead. He's not rotting. He might smell. His wound might smell. That's a reason. But think of this is a couple of days after Gettysburg, after the battle. Yes, they are. The corpses are rotting. There is blood everywhere. There's blood splattered on walls, on rock, on trees, on the ground, on the road, on fence posts. There is blood everywhere. And not only are there human bodies lying out in the sun. Remember, July 2nd is the hottest day of the year. Of that year, it was July the 2nd. So not only are there human bodies lying out in the sun, there are also horses and cows and anything that happened to get in the way of what was going on. And so the Second Battle of Gettysburg takes place. Gettysburg is invaded by millions of flies, and they are everywhere. And what a lot of people don't realize, and probably you don't realize, is that after the Battle of Gettysburg, somebody's got to clean up. And guess who that is? It's not the armies. It's the people of Gettysburg. And so not only do they endure the Battle of Gettysburg, they endure the Second Battle of Gettysburg. John Burns is just a great story. One of the heroes of Gettysburg. So much so that they put up a statue. What time is it? We don't have time to watch this. It's about 16 minutes long, so we'll finish that tomorrow. And we'll be done for the day. How about that? Boop, 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 boop. Boop.